Welcome back to the Place We Find Ourselves podcast. I'm Adam Young, and this is part 2 of my teaching about what happens to your nervous system in the midst of relational conflict. By the way, this is episode 80, which means it is the final episode of season 4. I am going to take a 2-month break before beginning season 5, so the next episode, episode 81, will be available on the Place We Find Ourselves app on Monday, March 1st. Remember, episodes release to the app 4 weeks before they are available everywhere else. So if you want to get new episodes early, please download the app, subscribe for $3 per month or $30 per year. You can do all that from my website. Okay, let me begin by summarizing the key takeaways from part 1. First, your body comes equipped with an exquisite ability called neuroception, which is the unconscious and automatic detection of threat or danger. Your nervous system is constantly scanning your relational environment for disconnection, for conflict, for rupture, all of which represents danger as far as your nervous system is concerned. Second, when your body scans the relational environment and detects anything that feels remotely threatening, it triggers your nervous system to do one of 3 things. First, socially engage, that is, talk to the other person. Second, go into a fight, flight, freeze reaction. Or third, shut down. And each of those 3 responses, talking to the other person, fight, flight, freeze, and shutting down, is driven by a different part of your nervous system. The first response, talking to the other person, is driven by the ventral portion of your vagus nerve. The second response, fight, flight, freeze, it's driven by your sympathetic nervous system. And the third response, shutting down, is driven by the dorsal portion of your vagus nerve. When things get a little unsafe, or there's a small conflict with another person, the first thing your body does is socially engage. If, through the process of neuroception, you realize that socially engaging is not going to work, it's not going to restore a safe connection with the other person, then the second thing your body does is fight, flight, freeze. Again, driven by your sympathetic nervous system. But what about when that doesn't work? What about when your neuroception makes you realize that neither fighting, nor fleeing, nor freezing is going to make this danger go away? That fighting isn't going to restore connection and safety. That yelling at your partner or raising your voice isn't going to make them see your point and restore connection. That fleeing to another room isn't going to work. What happens when your body realizes, no matter what I say or do, nothing is going to get the other person to see me, hear me, understand me, and respond to me? What happens is that your body begins to shut down. You go into a state of numbness and potentially utter despair. All the life drains out of you. This is the third response of your nervous system. The social engagement system, driven by the ventral portion of your vagus nerve, has not worked. The fight, flight, freeze, driven by your sympathetic nervous system, that hasn't worked. That hasn't restored safety and connection. And so the dorsal portion of your vagus nerve kicks in, which means that your body begins to shut down. Dorsal vagal shutting down happens when your nervous system is faced with life threat rather than mere danger. You can think of it this way. Relational difficulty activates the social engagement system. Relational danger activates the fight, flight, freeze response. But the prospect of relational death activates the shutdown response. This third bodily response of shutting down is driven by the dorsal portion of your vagus nerve, which is the part of your vagus nerve that connects with the organs below your diaphragm, the stomach, intestines, etc. Now, I want to give an example to illustrate how shutting down is different than freezing. And I also want to invite many of you who think that your partner shuts down in conflict to consider the possibility that they are actually freezing rather than shutting down, which is incredibly important, and I'll explain why in a moment. But first, the example. Imagine that there is a gazelle on the African prairie and a lion walks around the corner. The gazelle freezes. Why? Because via the process of neuroception, the gazelle knows that it cannot fight the lion and it is too close to the lion to flee from it. So, neuroception tells the gazelle, you can't fight and you can't flee. You better freeze. Now, what's happening inside the gazelle? It is in a hyper-aroused state driven by its sympathetic nervous system. But even though it is hyper-aroused, utterly amped up inside, it looks shut down and completely calm. It's not calm. It's the opposite of calm inside. It is frozen in terror. Despite the gazelle's outward stillness, the sympathetic nervous system is still in control, and all of the gazelle's muscles are poised to react should the situation change. Now, suppose that right at this moment, when the gazelle is frozen in terror, suppose another gazelle darts out into the prairie. What is the lion going to do? It will begin chasing the gazelle that just darted out, instead of going after the frozen gazelle. Why? Because when animals go into the freeze response, their tissue becomes less enjoyable to eat. And so the lion is much more interested in the fully alive gazelle that is running away. Here's the point. Do you see the neuroceptive brilliance of the first gazelle? The freeze response saved its life. Now, why am I talking about lions and gazelles? Because the same thing happens with you and your partner. The same thing happens with you and a friend when there's conflict. For example, suppose you are the person in the relationship who froze last week during that argument. Why did you freeze? Because your neuroception told you that the lion, that is your partner, your spouse, your close friend, was more apt to leave you alone and stop attacking you if you froze than if you fought back or fled. If you fight back with words, your partner, the lion, is going to amp up their volume and their intensity, and this registers as greater danger to your nervous system. If you flee, that is, leave the room, your partner might follow you into the other room and then keep bombarding you with words and accusations. This registers as greater danger to your nervous system, and so you freeze. Your face goes blank. Your body becomes still, because your nervous system knows that this response is the most likely way to get your partner, the lion, to stop coming after you. And by the way, if you are ambivalently attached, you are more likely to play the role of the lion when there is relational conflict. And if you are avoidantly attached, you are more likely to play the role of the gazelle when there is relational conflict. So, let me speak to you ambivalently attached attackers out there, of which I am one. I know you don't like being called an attacker, I don't either, but your partner perceives you this way. Here's what I want you to understand. Your partner is frozen not because they don't care about you, but because they care oh so very much. Why is your partner freezing up? Because they don't want to make the conflict worse. If they talk, if they talk back, if they respond, if they fight, they will, in their mind, make the disconnection and rupture worse. If they flee, they will make the disconnection and rupture worse. And so they freeze, oftentimes, just like the gazelle. They freeze up, inwardly panicked, and searching for the next right diffusing response, hoping that you will back away to take the pressure off and let them regroup. Also, please know this. Your partner has zero conscious control over this quote-unquote decision to freeze. It is not a decision they are making cortically with their conscious mind and their will. It is an automatic and unconscious shift into the freeze state based on their body's neuroception that fight and flight will make the conflict worse, which means the disconnection between the two of you will increase, which registers as immense danger to them. Why does disconnection with you register as danger to their nervous system? Because connection with you is so important to them. Because you are so important to them. Now, this same neuroceptive process and response applies to threats like the experience of sexual assault. This may be hard to listen to if you have been sexually assaulted or raped, but if you can hang in there, some of you might be relieved of immense shame as you hear what I'm about to explain. As the sexual assault began, you were operating out of your social engagement system, the ventral vagal complex. You used words and facial expressions and tone of voice to try and make the perpetrator stop. If or when it was clear that this was not going to work, your nervous system automatically and unconsciously discerned if you could fight back or not in a fraction of a second. When your nervous system automatically, without your knowing it, realized that fighting back was not going to make the assault stop, your nervous system took a nanosecond to determine if you could flee. If your nervous system automatically and unconsciously determined that fleeing was not an option, your nervous system may have concluded that you should freeze. Now, question: did you freeze when you were sexually assaulted, when you were sexually abused, when you were molested, when you were raped? Did you freeze? And have you been condemning yourself for decades because you froze, because you didn't fight back, because you didn't try to get away, or you didn't fight back long enough? Please, your body was responding brilliantly by freezing. Your nervous system was doing everything it could to make the assault end, to make the abuse and trauma stop. Why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you run away? Because your neuroception determined that it would have made things worse if you had fought or tried to flee. Now, and again, I apologize for lingering here, but as the sexual assault progressed and the helplessness and the terror got worse, some of you shifted from a sympathetic nervous system freeze state into a dorsal vagal state of shutdown and collapse. What does this mean? Well, when we can't get away from the danger, when we're held down and trapped, we shift into a different bodily state. Think back to the gazelle and the lion for a moment. When the gazelle sees the lion lunging at it, it hasn't been able to outrun it. And the gazelle realizes it's over. The gazelle's nervous system instantly activates the dorsal vagal state. When the dorsal portion of the vagus nerve is activated, the following things happen. First, opioids flood the body to prepare the animal for a much less painful death. Here's how Porges puts it. The dorsal vagal system raises pain thresholds. It enables an individual to experience horrendous exposure to abuse and not consciously feel it, and thus to survive. Second, all bodily processes begin to shut down. Heart rate and breathing slow way down. And third, again, this is three things that happens when the dorsal portion of your vagus nerve is activated. Third, dissociation may set in. What does this mean? Well, have you ever heard or read about someone who said, during the sexual assault, it was like I was floating above my body watching it happen? That's dissociation. You disconnect from the present moment and you disconnect from your body. It is a brilliant God-given reaction that is driven by the dorsal portion of your vagus nerve. It is the last resort of your nervous system when your neuroception detects that nothing else is going to work to get you out of danger. Now, here's the thing. The dorsal vagal shutdown response can happen during conflict with a partner or a close friend. It is different than the freeze state. You are not hyper-aroused. Rather, all the life has drained out of your body, and you have no hope left that anything will work to restore safety and connection. No hope that there is anything you can do to get your partner to respond to you with kindness. No hope that you can make this better. This can happen with both ambivalently attached people and avoidantly attached people. It is a horrific bodily state of hopelessness and despair. When you find yourself in that state, the shutdown state, please understand that you did not get there by a voluntary decision. There is nothing voluntary. There is nothing executive control center about entering the shutdown state. Your nervous system automatically does it when you detect life threat. So for example, you may have seen videos of a cat catching a mouse. And when the mouse is caught, it immobilizes and it looks dead. It's limp. This is not voluntary behavior. The mouse is not deciding to play dead. The mouse's nervous system is automatically preparing it for death. So let me make some summary statements. Your nervous system has three possible states that it can be in. You can be in the social engagement state, the fight, flight, freeze state, or the shutdown state. When you are in the shutdown state, your body is hypo-aroused. Hypo means low. Low arousal, very, very low. Dead, numb, shut down. When you are in the fight, flight, freeze state, your body is hyper-aroused, highly aroused, amped up. And when you are in the social engagement state, your body is inside what's called your window of tolerance. You are calm and present and alert and aware. Why does all this matter? All this discussion about your nervous system matters because your physiological state is a major determinant of what you say or do during conflict. Let me say that slightly differently. You cannot choose to talk in a nice, calm voice when you are in the fight, flight, freeze stage of your nervous system state. You can't. It's not an option. Why? Because your body's physiological state prevents access to your nice, calm voice. When your sympathetic nervous system, fight, flight, freeze, is in high gear, when you're all amped up, you no longer have access to the nice, calm voice of your social engagement system. You don't have access to warm tone in your voice. Why? Because the state of your nervous system determines the range of the possible behaviors that your body can engage in. Does that make sense? I want you to understand this because I want you to understand why you behave the way you do in the midst of relational conflict. Here's again Stephen Porges. Here's how he puts it. The neural circuits that support social behavior and emotional regulation are available only when the nervous system deems the environment safe. In other words, when you are in that ventral portion of the vagus nerve, the social engagement system, that bodily state, that's the only bodily state in which you are able to engage in social behaviors that are pro-social and that bring connection and that allow you to emotionally regulate. What Porges is saying is that when your nervous system detects danger, it shifts you into a different bodily state. And this different bodily state dictates what behavioral responses you can make. This is not about what you can choose to do. This is what is physiologically available to your body. For example, when we are in a mobilized state driven by our sympathetic nervous system, fight, flight, freeze, Our bodies are in a defensive posture, and our bodies are not able to give off cues of safety. We are not able to give off to the other person safe nonverbal cues. When we are in conflict with a loved one, our bodies enter a different physiological state, often, which is mediated by the sympathetic nervous system, fight, flight, freeze. When this happens, we have less access to the social engagement system, and therefore our body is not in a physiological state to communicate cues of safety to our partner with our facial expression and tone of voice and body language. It's not an option for us. So, an example to illustrate this. Visualize a couple, husband and wife, interacting on treadmills while they are running. 2 treadmills, husband and wife running on their respective treadmill. And they've been running for a long time. As they run, their physiological state will shift toward a greater involvement of the sympathetic nervous system. Heart rate goes up, breathing goes up, etc. You know what it's like when you're running and you're out of breath. Now, in that state, do you think they can have a meaningful conversation in which they express emotions to each other? In which they express deep, tender emotions to each other? Of course they can't have a conversation like that. Why? Why not? Why is that? Because when we are in a mobilized state, sympathetic nervous system, there is a limit to our ability to express emotion via our facial muscles and our tone of voice. Now, this same thing happens when you are in a fight with your partner and your body shifts into a mobilized state, a sympathetic nervous system driven fight, flight, freeze state. You lose certain abilities, namely the ability to non-verbally communicate tender emotions and empathy. Why? Why does that happen? Because your bodily state cannot support the regulation of facial expressions and prosodic vocalizations. That just means tone of voice. In other words, your nonverbal communication abilities become severely limited. Here's the point I want you to hear. Your body's physiological state affects the range of behavioral responses available to you. This has massive implications for why you say and do what you say and do during a fight, during conflict. Your ventral vagal system, which allows you to empathize with others, with the other person, is only available to you when you feel safe, when you're in a physiological state of safety. Okay, goodness gracious. I know that was a fire hydrant of information in a very short period of time, but please go back and listen to these 2 episodes again if there were portions that really resonated with you, because understanding polyvagal theory, that's what it's called, understanding this will hopefully bring new levels of compassion and kindness to both yourself and your partner when you are in the midst of relational conflict. Thank you so much for listening to this final episode of Season 4. Remember, I will take a 2-month break before beginning Season 5, so the next episode, episode 81, will be available on the Place We Find Ourselves app on Monday, March 1st. Remember that episodes release to the app 4 weeks before they are available everywhere else. So if you want to get episodes early, as soon as they're released, you've got to download the app and subscribe for $30 a year. You can do all that right from my website. May you be kind to the place in which you find yourself for the next couple of months. Thank you.